Thanks very much to all of the panel members and to Meg for your terrific job as the moderator. And while you're moving down to the floor, we're going to ask the 5 folks who are going to wrap up today's session to trade places and take the microphones that you have. Pass them along.
Thank you. You did a great job.
You know, the last session was really skillfully integrated in many ways, both in themes and emphasis, identifying opportunities for reorientation of focus, of incentives, of processes, of funds.
Relieve you of
Yes. Oh, right. Yes.
Really,
yes. Thank you.
Giving us a terrific launch pad for the final wrap-up session. Very helpful to the steering committee as it contemplates the cross-cutting themes that have been heard today. And that allows me the opportunity to emphasize that the ledger is still open. So please, anyone on the webcast or in the room who has comments and suggestions, please pass them along to us via the website or directly. And now to reflect on those cross-cutting themes and the next steps, we have 5 members of the steering committee, including 3 moderators, Sheila Burke and Meg Gaines, and I think Alan is pinch hitting for Elias in that capacity, and our 2 co-chairs who will moderate the session and then wrap it up.
Microphone.
Well, Mark and I have an easy job. We're just going to ask the various moderators what your take is from each of your session.
And I'd like to start that. I just want to make sure everybody's mic'd up. Are you listening? Okay. Hopefully we'll be able to find one more. But in the meantime, just to follow up on Victor's opening question, you all solicited a lot of good advice for the next president with a lot of very tall or slow elevators. And I'm wondering if in addressing Victor's question, if you could maybe pull out some of the either key points or insights that were particularly memorable to you from the very broad and extensive discussions today.
Sheila?
Sure. I think the first is that people need to learn how to give an elevator speech, which is, for any of us who've worked on the Hill or worked in the administration, it's a very specific presentation style. I thought it was a remarkably interesting day, and I think there were, in fact, common themes that ran throughout. I have 7 that struck me during the course of my session, and then really I saw woven in the other sessions. One is the absolute consensus on the magnitude of the issue. But also the opportunity that's presented in a transition that we are about to go through. And we've focused in large part on the White House, but there's also going to be a tremendous transition in the House and the Senate. So I think all the way through, from administration appointees to the agencies to the Congress, great opportunity to inform folks and to move an agenda forward. I think it's clear that we need new competencies in our professionals and people providing care, and new relationships. Frequently mentioned were the intersection of housing, nutrition, behavioral health, healthcare writ large. So those intersections and the ability to talk within a community, I think, became very evident throughout the day. The importance of continued experimentation and research. We heard time and time again that we needed to do more about what we knew and what we knew worked, and somehow figure out how to scale that up. The value and the complexity as well of sharing information that allows us to be informed and allows us to essentially scale up things that work. The importance, and I saw it particularly in the first panel, but we've seen it throughout, and that is the balance between the public and private sectors, that they have to begin to talk with one another and share more readily the information that can inform us all, and they each have a role. The vital role of patients, I thought Mark began beautifully this morning with his trifecta. and suggesting to us that we not treat people as a disease category, but rather we treat them as individuals and acknowledge what their desires are and their values are as we develop these systems to essentially provide services. And then finally, that there's a whole lot we don't know.
My next?
Sure.
I have
Thanks.
my own microphone.
You're next.
Okay, I'm next. So I always wanted to be Elias Serhuni, so this is very exciting. So basically, what I took away from our panel, interestingly, was different from what I had written as a preliminary summary, so that's even better. I would say the two core questions that we talked about was how does the nature of the biomedical science and technology enterprise need to evolve in order to meet the needs of a 21st and 2nd century healthcare system? And secondly, when and how is best to invest? And I think I won't spend time on that. I talked a lot about that before. So these are not particularly in any order, but I think they're important. There's a need to evolve new paradigms for both doing and using science and technology, and that affects the protocols, the methodologies for asking questions, but also sort of the nature of the ecosystem needs to be conceptualized differently. The ecosystem can't have the isolated parts that it now has. We have to find ways that we actually can somehow, integrate's the wrong word, but work together something. The basic scientists, the translational scientists, the clinical scientists, but industry, academia, and most importantly, patients. I think the point was importantly made in our group, but made in every other group, that a failure to listen to and attend to the particular needs of patients is a mistake. I had a personal experience when I was the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse at a town meeting. The best question I was ever asked, the most insightful question, was asked by the mother of an adolescent in a session on marijuana. It was basically, how does the brain of an adolescent change over time? And at the time, we knew nothing about it. We had all assumed that it was developed much earlier than it was. But anyway, that's just one example. Another very important category of issues has to do with data. Dealing with the volume of data and the types of data and how difficult it is to curate data, to archive data, but more to use data. How will we set up standards? How will we take advantage of the opportunities provided by either electronic health records or other data sets? And that's a very important one. I guess the question is not only all of the issues around the collection of data, but also an array of issues around the use of data and how best to exploit the opportunities. The last category has to do with training the workforce of the future, and we're going to need new paradigms, new partners, new cross-disciplinary thinking, and a way to enable scientists of the future to actually function in that ecosystem. Their scientific parents and mentors have a very big investment in growing little thems when they grow up. But the truth is that the nature of the scientists of the future has got to be different. They have to be multidisciplinary. They have to be able to have conversation across basic, clinical, applied, translational domains. They have to be able to deal with large amounts of data, and they need to be able to listen, which is not the best trait of scientists. Not only listen to their colleagues from other domains, that's not me, but also to listen to patients in a real way. There's a phenomenon that's getting a lot of attention in sort of the broader science and technology enterprise called public engagement with science as opposed to public communication of science. And that's clearly something that is critically important. It's a mindset about dialogue rather than monologue, and it's a mindset that has yet to fully get immersed into the biomedical science and technology enterprise. So those are sort of the major categories. The issue of when and how to invest is having initiatives is good. Targeting initiatives has to be moderated. Being specific has to be moderated because ultimately, from a long-term perspective, history has taught us that curiosity-driven, field-generated research has actually served the nation incredibly well and is likely to do that into the future. We just don't always have the time, or we don't feel that we have the time to wait for those long-term answers and need to do something, invest in a way that will help us accelerate it. Again, talking to the scientists about how best to do that is much more important than just having the government decide. I think I'll stop with that.
Right.
So we hear the things, I think we hear the things we're attuned to hearing, which is fascinating. And so one of the things that I heard a lot of was confusion about what do we mean by engagement? Do we mean engaging patients, as was just referred to in a clinical encounter, to make sure that we ask what their goals are and what they want? We heard that. That's something we mean. But do we also mean engaging people? Howard's kind of link between patients and people, if we could start talking about that, in a much broader notion of redesigning and rethinking what our goals are and making sure that patients are, or that people are, involved in the identification and description of the problem we're trying to solve or the goals we're trying to set, that we are involved together co-creating essentially the research study, right? What are we trying to do? What do we think? What problem are we trying to solve? How would we decide about what data would show us we would need to learn about this problem? Whom would we ask of that data of? How would we ask it? How would we interpret the answers we get? And how would we sort of flip that into interventions, recommendations for interventions? All of that has to be done with people present whose lives it affects and integrally and fulsomely involved in the whole mishigas. Because if you don't, then too many times we define a problem that other people don't really see as the problem. And we look for data in places where it isn't really found, and we ask questions that no one's willing to answer. And we interpret answers in ways that don't make any sense in terms of the context, because we haven't been where they are. We haven't lived what they've lived. So a big piece for me in the day is just being sure we really commit to the micro, meso, and macro levels and notions of engagement, I think, are engaging people in the process.
By the way, is mishigas a Chinese word?
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
My wife would tell me that.
I always think, I was really struck today by the theme of, it sort of was divided into everything that was recommended or suggested or whatever, it was divided into kind of the start-stop, right? If we would only stop doing the things we know don't work and start doing the things we know do work, we would just be light years ahead of where we are right now. We already know a lot of this. And I think that's the so hard, I wrote something once, because I was once on Coumadin, which is a blood thinner, And it took me 3 doctor visits to get myself taken off of Coumadin. And it just really struck me how much easier it is to be put on a medication than it is to come off of a medication. And this business about starting and stopping things in healthcare is really interesting to me and really kind of, I think, really relevant to our analysis and to our advice. I heard, and I think I felt the same thing, that the education question needs to be fleshed out much more fulsomely. What are 21st century professionals? What will they do? Suppose we have computers that diagnose much more accurately and present the treatment options much more accurately. You know, first of all, what does that leave clinicians to do, which is a fascinating question and a really important question, and what implications does that have for education? But second of all, where does that leave healthcare? Because if I get told that I need this other diagnostic procedure, but unfortunately we don't own one of those machines in your insurance company, if that ever really came up and out, like for real, that would be a fascinating lever in the change of, I think, you know, sort of entrenched healthcare insurance system, kind of, or non-system, or whatever it was. 2 last things. One, I think, is there's this really, to me, the huge elephant in the room is trust, and it's all over the place. Who do we trust? What do we trust? Public, private. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. How could we get really, how could we dream and get really bold about daring to want something really big, like health and well-being, instead of the ability to get your wrist repaired or something like that? You know, how could we really dream for that? And I think that's all around this notion of trust. And it's a challenge for us. It's a hurdle for us, I think. And it would be a hurdle for me as I was beginning to feel like the president a little. And it would be a hurdle for me as the president. And then the last thing is the words we use are so, there's so much in the words we use. I have this obsession with the word delivery, because there's nothing co-creating about what UPS does. I mean, I don't even have to be home and they can deliver. So if we really mean we want patients engaged at the micro, meso, and macro level, we have to stop saying delivery, because you can deliver me something. I'm very passive in the delivery relationship. And people versus patients, Howard talked about that. Just so many words, even the words we have, the verbs that are in the recommendations all through the 19 papers are all like address, assess, reorganize. They are all what you do to something else. There is no co-create, explore, inquire, none of those words that mean we want to do this with you. And I think we want to mean those words. We want to use them and mean them. So those are my...
Outstanding. Mark?
I just have, this has been a very intense day. Lots of proposals, lots of discussion, and you all have done a tremendous job of leading all of that. I just had one follow-up from you, just picking up on these last points. So clearly no shortage of good proposals on what there seemed to be pretty broad agreement, very important topics, as I think Sheila said, some real opportunities to address it. An articulation that you all three emphasized around sort of patient ascendancy at the center of all of this, whether it's the new fundamentals of the research enterprise, or the reforms in healthcare policies and delivery, or new community-focused approaches on helping individuals achieve better well-being from childhood on. A lot of this has not really been discussed in this campaign season all that extensively, and maybe that's a good thing. Campaigns are about highlighting differences, and maybe that's a reflection of some deeper agreement or potential for agreement here. As you look forward, and keeping in mind that we are at one step in a process for this Vital Directions effort, something that, thanks to Victor's leadership, the National Academies are very committed to seeing through. Are you optimistic? Is there anything that would make you more optimistic about action on these really critical issues?
So, given the nature of the campaigns and the discussions that we've had so far, I think a summary statement is they're remarkably substanceless. And so that makes you pessimistic generally. However, when any new administration takes office, oops, they're suddenly faced with substance, and they're going to have to deal with substance. And hopefully, if the summary documents, I think nobody's going to read 19, no president's going to read 19 papers, each of which is 19 pages long. I think if the summary documents can capture some of the main spirit, we really will be better off. And perhaps we can get our substance interjected into it. I was struck during the day that you know, presidents do things at the highest level of generality in most cases. But there are people who are responsible for leading efforts in great detail often, and I think they're the people who will actually be influenced. So hopefully we can, A, keep it crisp, but B, be very specific about what it is that we're talking about and what it is we're asking about. My last comment about that would be, if there's anything we can do to reduce the amount of jargon, even that we heard today, it would be really good. We talk funny. They don't. They don't talk our funny. They talk their funny. So either we want to make sure that we don't use terms that other people won't naturally understand. And although that's totally self-evident, I started collecting during the day and then I decided to stop. So it's just advice.
Mark, I think you ask a good question. And I think in some respects the absence of a great deal of detail works in our favor because people haven't taken things off the table, you know, notwithstanding the rhetoric around the ACA. But I think that and I feel like, again, an apologist for the legislative branch, yes, we're having a huge change at the level of the White House and the agencies. But a number of these initiatives and a number of the things we've spoken about are, in fact, of a great deal of interest to the members of the committees of jurisdiction. And whether it's the Ways and Means Committee, the Finance Committee, the Help Committee, Energy and Commerce, Freddie Upton's stepping down, but, you know, Wyden's very concerned about chronic illness and high cost, high need. So that there is an opportunity both in the executive branch with the new administration, and to your point, the agency heads, the folks that we might imagine coming into office, irrespective of whomever it is that's elected, will in fact be interested in these details, and I think the papers will serve as a tremendous starting point. But we can't ignore the fact that the legislature is also proceeding forward. They will have things that will have come back as a result of work done this year and the last couple of years in this Congress will repeat themselves. The principles in many of those are remaining in place. And expect to come back. Certainly Hatch does, Wyden does, you know, Brady does. So you've got members coming back whose staffs are invested, who will be very interested in this, and I think there's a great value in acquainting them with the work that we are doing. And I think, obviously, as the transition teams come into play and they begin to play their role once the election is settled, there again will be an opportunity, as we've alerted them to the presence of these papers. But I think it is worthwhile done, the timing is good, and I think we ought to look at the opportunities both with the executive branch as well as continued conversations on the Hill.
I guess the advantage of having me respond to this question is I know absolutely nothing about electoral politics or the Hill or anything else, so take it for what it's worth. But I would just reiterate kind of a point I made, but in a different way, which is I think you have an untapped army of people who live in flyover country like me, who care and are smart and are waiting to be called to action. And I think, certainly I felt it on my panel, when people speak from their hearts and speak the truth, whatever that, small t, their truth, and really call on a higher part of, in this case, elected officials. We all are, have both. But I think that has more power than we remember when we get sort of stuck in the bubble. And so I would just remind you that if this is a bold and aspirational document, then you will have an army of people ready to come help you talk about it and write letters about it and contact their congresspeople about it and that kind of thing. And you have an entire network of patient advocate groups, disease-based groups, the whole thing, who summoned respond. People with a lot of skin in the game.
Well, that is the connection that this effort needs, and I think it's a great point to end on.
Mark, could I
yes,
just,
please.
before we end on that, just one additional thing that I think didn't come up as frequently as it might have today. Certainly the private sector, who are proceeding ahead. I mean, we saw that with Lou and Rick and others, so we can't ignore the fact that they are pushing ahead with some of this innovation. But the other player are the states. And there is an enormous amount of work taking place at the state level. And I think those folks, many of whom will remain in place, many of whom are looking for support, guidance, direction in terms of testing out some of these models, the role that Medicaid's playing increasingly in terms of testing out delivery system and payment models. I think we can't ignore the opportunity with state legislators, but with governors, state Medicaid directors, the area state and territorial health officials. I think all of those are folks with whom we should be partnering because much of this, in fact, will occur locally. It is local. And I think a lot of the work can be done irrespective of how long it plays out at the federal level. The states can, in fact, begin to move some of these agendas forward. And I think we need to focus on connecting with them as well.
That's a great point that came up repeatedly today with many of the examples that we heard about from local, regional, private sector efforts, as well as regional and state-based collaborations. Excellent. So that is a great point to end on. I want to give Victor the last word, but for all of you who have been with us here in the room and online, we very much appreciate your active participation in this discussion. This is a discussion, and it's one that will continue. Liz Finkelman is going to be taking in the further comments that we receive, as well as helping us synthesize what we've done already. It may seem like a big job, but she's already had to get 150 different experts and National Academy associates together to get us to this point. So I know she's up for it. We do want to hear from you about next steps. There will be some further work from the National Academies to summarize and hone the key points in all of these VitalDirections papers. We've got Howard Koh's effort. For those of you who don't have time to read all of them, Howard's editorial is a nice first pass at summarizing all of this more briefly. So more to come, and it's going to be stronger thanks to all of your input. We really appreciate working with us on this effort.
Well, my comments are going to be very short. First, a lot of thank yous. Everyone in this room, everyone who participated, the 150 experts, the panelists, and of course Mark and Mike and Liz and Laura and people who just pulled this together. It's just unbelievable. Certainly, I feel that we're ending up with a really optimistic note. That's what I'm hearing. When I first started and I listened to the first session, I leaned over to Elias and I said, "This is like boiling the ocean." And he quoted me on this. How many stops and starts do we need to do, right? But I think that as I'm pulling it all together, I feel very optimistic. because I think everybody wants the same thing. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. It's a matter of now trying to pull our energy together to say, how can we take advantage of the opportunity to make a difference? And you heard many of this. I'm not going to repeat. I would say the following. First of all, it's a great privilege to serve all of you as the president of NAM. And this just reinforces why we're doing what we're doing. That is, perhaps we can make a difference. I'm going to expect 150 experts somehow or other will be also involved with the next transition, et cetera. So we already have a lot of people who know what we're trying to do and are on board with what we're trying to do. My last point is what Mark just said. This is not really a fly-by-night project. It's not, okay, we got things written, we got things published, it's wonderful, we have a symposium, and then because we say, well, we got to take it to the Hill, we're going to take it to a transition team, we take it to a new team, and what Sheila said was so right. This actually is an ongoing initiative. And this may be actually going on for a long time, but that is to say that with all these great ideas, we should be working with the state, with the private sector, just to keep this thing alive and take all these ideas, which may not be all implemented, you know, with a stroke of a pen, but can be implemented by many people all agreeing that we really think this is the way to go and do this as a long-term project. And so, Mark, Mike, Liz, I think we have a bit of work to do ahead of us, but I think as Mark said, I'm totally committed that this, in fact, is a great project, and we should be working with all of you, co-create, that's the word, to make it happen. So thank you very much for all of you being here and everybody on the webcast. Thank you.